Hi, it's Professor Murray. Welcome back to Project Management. This lecture is on quality. I'm going to talk about three different categories or three different topics regarding quality. I'll go over a little bit of history of quality. I know that sounds kind of odd to say history of quality, but give you a little bit of background on some history. I'll talk a little bit about some quality tools that are interesting. And then I'll talk about how quality is applied in project management. All right, starting with the quality gurus. And these are names that you should be at least familiar with. I'm not going to tell you about each one of them, but you need to know that there were some quality gurus. And these are probably the most notable. There's a few others, but Deming, Juran, and Crosby, those are to me, the most important ones. What happened was in the 50s, Japan was still recovering from World War II. Their country was fairly devastated. America was moving along. Everything was great. The economy was great. The auto industry was making cars and selling them as fast as they could build them. These three quality guys, Deming, Juran, and Crosby, found no audience in America. No one wanted to listen to people telling them that they should improve their quality. They were making cars, they're making lots of money, they're making dishwashers, they're making everything. Their money was flowing. They didn't have time to worry about quality. So these guys went over to Japan and they taught the Japanese how to incorporate quality into everything they do. And of course, everyone's heard of Toyota, and you know of Toyota's reputation for quality. And that built out of what these five people, or actually there's more, but what these quality gurus taught the Japanese. Quality went from America to Japan. They adopted it, they embraced it, and they made part of everything they did. Then we moved forward to the 1980s, and all of a sudden America they had fallen behind. Quality concepts came back from Japan back to America. Total Quality Management, TQM, is the summary name of all those efforts that went on. One important note though, the Americans didn't just learn from the Japanese and say, okay, what you're doing really works, we're going to do that too. They looked at the success the Japanese were having and they said, okay, we need some quality systems, but we're going to do it different than what you guys are doing. So American manufacturing went off and started doing their own interpretation of Japanese quality systems. They had some success, but primarily it didn't work very well. So that was the TQM movement of the 80s and really the 90s too. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Europeans developed their own standard, the ISO, International Standards Organization. They developed what is a fairly famous ISO 9000. Eventually it evolved into 9001, 9002, 9003, 9004. It was a good system, but it's complex and it's rigid and it's very difficult to achieve certification. The nice thing is it gave people a standard where standards didn't really exist. So a lot of corporations decided that they should become ISO 9000 certified, and then they could tell their customers that they have this quality certification. What's more common today is what's known as Lean Six Sigma. The whole concepts behind Lean and Six Sigma are to eliminate waste, and that's not just saying to eliminate garbage, but to eliminate waste. If you're doing an activity and half of your effort doesn't lead to the final production of whatever you're trying to do, then you have 50% of your effort is waste. With Six Sigma, their big push is to use data to support all decisions. And these two concepts really incorporate all the best things that the quality gurus put in place, that the TQM movement put in, and that the ISO 9000 certifications put in place. It's kind of the end result of all these different quality initiatives, and it's what's current today. So you really should know about Lean Six Sigma. To get a better understanding of Lean Six Sigma, I've given you a link here. It's a YouTube video produced by an organization called Simply Learn, and it's called Lean Six Sigma in 8 minutes. And I put a link here, but you actually can't click on the link because this is a video. But just do a search for Lean Six Sigma in 8 minutes. And guess what? It takes 8 minutes to watch it. Real good video. A little bit about some quality tools. And these are mostly related to Six Sigma. The first is a cause and effect diagram, a fishbone diagram. And we've got some real cool animation going on here. It's cause and effect because what you do is you identify different causes. So here we're looking at missed free throws. So that's the effect, and what causes someone to miss their free throw. It could be their method, the material, manpower, and maybe the machine. So you look at a problem or a situation and you look for the causes that could lead to that problem, and you break them into categories. And you notice it's got a few names. One is cause and effect diagram. A second is fishbone diagram because obviously it looks like a fish skeleton. And the third and probably most important is it's called an Ishikawa diagram. Ishikawa was one of those 5 gurus on the earlier slide. It's important to know all 3 of these names. So cause and effect, you identify all the things that could cause that end effect. The next quality tool, which is very well known, very popular, is called a Pareto chart. And you may have heard this referred to as a 80-20 chart. And the last one is a control chart. In this example, we're tracking missed shots. In each game, they've recorded what % of the free throws were missed. And they're plotted on the chart. And then there's an upper control limit and a lower control limit set. And where this becomes important is when you have a process that's in control, none of your parts are failing, but you see something like this where you see a trend and it's going in some direction, that's an indicator that your process is possibly going out of control. That should be an indicator that you should look at your process and put in some corrections or change what's going on before the process goes out of control. So it's a very powerful tool, and it's well used and well known in industry, but not so much in project management. All right, let's talk about quality in project management. First, let's go way back to the definition. What is a project? And you notice in number 2, a project is a unique activity. It's something that's not done on a regular basis. Let's go back to our control chart. The whole idea with a control chart is every time you do something, you track your success rate, how good you did on it. To make that work, you have to do something over and over again. That doesn't work very well in a project because projects are typically unique. You might, if you're building a house, you might buy a load of lumber for your house, and that's the only time you buy the load of lumber. So it doesn't really do you much good to track how good your lumber was because you're not going to buy that load of lumber again. We need something different. Okay, let's look at some differences. A process environment, that's like a manufacturing process. And that's where the same or similar things are done every day. And we can track our process compared to a project environment. With a process environment, we want to monitor and record everything that's going on every time we do something. With projects, we have a number of one-time events, so that doesn't work. With process environments, we want to continuously improve things we do, and that leads out of our monitoring and recording things. Again, with projects, they're one-time events, so that's very difficult. With a process environment, we tend to inspect our work in progress. As we're making things, we check them and we see if they're good or not good, and then if we're producing bad parts, we make some adjustment, and we make our process better. With projects, here's where it gets interesting. The work is often done externally. If you're running a factory and you're doing manufacturing, you do the work in your factory and you watch what's going on. You inspect it, you monitor it, you control it. But when you're managing a project, a lot of the work is done somewhere else by a different company. All right, so the quality focus for process environment is on past and present activities. So you record what you did, you look at what you did and how you've done and how you are doing, and you manage quality that way. With projects, since that doesn't really work, what we have to do is we have to focus on future activities. What's going to be done in the future? What could go wrong with how that's done? And what do we do to protect against that going wrong? How do we manage quality in the future? First is you have to specify what you need and expect. If you're building a house and you call up the lumber department at the local distributor and say, I need a load of 2x4s, then you're going to get whatever they want to send you. However, if you call them up and you specify that you want a certain grade of 2x4 and you want a certain dryness and you want them in certain lengths, then you can expect to get what you asked for. If you don't get what you asked for, then you can return it or ask for a discount on it. If you didn't specify, then you get what you get. Second is you have to obtain commitments. Before you buy something, you have to get an agreement with the supplier that you're going to be purchasing a certain item of a certain quality and they're going to give you what you need. Third is, this is pretty interesting. We use penalties and rewards. Penalties and rewards, that doesn't really apply to something like a manufacturing environment. If you're running a factory and you're building widgets, you don't go and penalize your employee if they're not making good parts. At the same time, you don't tend to give them a reward for doing a good day's work. You expect their work to be good and you pay them what your agreed wage is. With projects though, we use penalties and rewards. It's somewhat difficult to administer because no one wants to be penalized, and how do you determine if someone really deserves a reward? Again, going back to the first item, you have to specify what you need, and in the second item, you have to get commitments that the supplier will give you what you need. If they do, you pay them. If they exceed their commitment, maybe you give them a reward, and there might be penalties involved. Next is you build partnerships and relationships with different suppliers. If you're building houses, you tend to have a set of subcontractors that you would work with. You know that those people do a certain quality of work and charge a certain rate. And with the partnership and a relationship, you can manage your quality just by knowing who the firm is that you're hiring and knowing whether or not they're going to give you good quality. Next is you have to communicate. You have to know how things are progressing on your project, and you have to know if there's problems that might affect your project. So communication is important, and also communication has to be frequent, and sometimes it has to be formal. There's no point, especially if you're administering penalties and rewards, there's no point in having informal communications. You have to formalize what your opinions are and your actions have to be timely. Going back to the load of lumber that you buy for your house, if you order a load of lumber that should meet a certain specification and it doesn't meet that, but you go and use it and you don't do anything about it, and then maybe a month later you call up the lumber supplier and say, hey, that load of lumber wasn't what I asked for, there's not really any way you can resolve anything at that point. So you have to have timely action. And the last is you have to involve stakeholders. Stakeholders are everyone who has some interest in the project. It could be the final customer of the project. It could be the people paying for it. Could also be the neighbors down the street who really have no involvement other than they see the project being built, and they might have some opinions about, for example, whether you're contaminating their drinking water. You have to be very aware of who the stakeholders are, and you have to communicate with them. That's how we manage quality in a project. It's very different from in a manufacturing environment because most things are done one time. Many things are done by outside firms, and you have to look to the future of what might go wrong and not so much at the present and the past. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next lecture.